I'm Cassidy Quinn, and this is Mentally Together. Because whether you can see it on the surface or not, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. And no matter what our brains are experiencing, we're not alone, we're together. Do you ever think about how weird it is to just be a human? We all live inside our own brains or bodies, and therefore we do not know what another brain or body is experiencing or feeling. So when things happen to us, or we think a certain thing, we don't know if that's normal or acceptable. And yes, I put air quotes around both of those words. We don't know until we actually talk to another human or read about their experience. For example, I remember when I was in high school, I had headaches every single day, and I was dizzy all the time. But I'd kind of learned to accept that as my, quote, normal, because that was my baseline. That's how I felt. But then one day, my boyfriend at the time said to me, that's actually not normal to be in pain every single day. You maybe don't have to feel like that. Which seems very obvious to me now, but at the time, it was groundbreaking. It still took me and doctors a few years to figure out that all of those headaches and that dizziness was a result of my food allergies, but still, I assumed all of that pain was normal until someone other than myself told me it wasn't. And I'm realizing this is the same for many things in the world, like mental health. If you feel sad all the time or anxious all the time, you might start to feel like that is your normal, and that's just how you're always gonna feel. And it is normal in the sense that it is okay to not feel okay, and so many people have experienced those feelings. But it's not normal in the way that we should just leave it as is. There are things you can do to try to feel better, there are ways you can get help, but it just might not seem that way until you start talking about it. Or racism. Okay? It is not a new thing. And if you are someone who's been on the receiving end of racism, clearly you're aware of that. Yet it took until 2020 for many of us to realize that what we see as our, quote, normal world should not be normal at all, and we need to change it. And those realizations just keep happening. As I'm recording this, it's been almost 2 weeks since 8 people were killed in a series of mass shootings in Georgia. 6 of them were Asian women. And while this horrific event may be the most extreme example of Asian hate we've seen in recent memory, anti-Asian violence is also not new. And for those of us who didn't pay enough attention, didn't take it seriously enough until now, this is a really crappy realization to come to. Because we could have, and should have, done something sooner. But all we can do now is learn new things and then change our actions moving forward. And that is one of the cool things about being a human, in my opinion. We can intake new information and change our perspective and our actions. We can ask why things are this way and not just accept it as fact or normal. Why my brain is feeling sad all the time. Why Asian Americans are being attacked. Why Black people are being killed disproportionately by police. We have to keep talking about these things and stop ignoring them. And hopefully that will kickstart the change. So today, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about some of these things with Satomi Ishikawa. Satomi is a storyteller, community builder, and purpose-driven marketer from California, now living in Tokyo, Japan. She wants to leave the world better than she found it. And I am so grateful that part of that includes opening up about her own mental health and what she's experienced as an Asian American. Now, this episode does discuss some very serious topics, including suicide. So as always, if you are experiencing some of those feelings yourself, please reach out to a professional for help. You can always reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Now, let's get into this episode with Satomi Ishikawa, our first international guest on Mentally Together. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm honored. What are you doing over there? Tell me a little about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a first generation Japanese American. So I was actually born and raised in California. But after graduating from grad school in 2019, I decided to take a move to Tokyo, where the Tokyo Olympics in 2020 were supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Uh,
About that.
but I had always wanted to experience living in Japan. My parents are from here, and my extended family lives in Japan. And so it's always been a childhood dream to live and experience the culture, experience where my parents grew up. So I took the opportunity to move while I can and ended up finding a job here right before the pandemic hit.
Woohoo.
Um, and
Nice.
and yeah, I've been working in the outdoor industry since. That's why I'm in Tokyo.
That's awesome. Has it obviously it's probably a little different than you expected over there just because it's a pandemic, so moving to any new place would be a little weird, but overall has it been different than what you thought it would be like living in Japan or kind of similar to what you expected?
So this is actually my round two. I moved once right after college in 2013 for about 2 years. And so in total, I've been here for about 4 years. So I had some expectations. Obviously, with the pandemic, it is a little bit different than the first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did both the first time and the second time. I struggled in the first few months to familiarize myself with what living here is like, even though I am by blood Japanese
Mhm.
and my parents in the States, they really maintained a Japanese household. So all of like the cultural isms and customs that are traditional to Japan, we've been taught from an early age. But even though that has been inputted in me, I feel like living here is quite different.
Oh.
And yeah, I tell this to a lot of my friends, but I realized how non-Japanese I was, or like more American I was, is a
Mhm.
better way of putting it. Once I moved here, which was a great learning for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, you mentioned that you are first generation Japanese American. What was it like growing up as far as mental health? Did you guys talk about it? Was it something you didn't talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word mental health pretty much was non-existent in my vocabulary until later in my 20s when my friends started to really speak about their own mental health journey. So my household, for one, did not really, I mean, we don't open up, even though we all talk, it's not like we don't communicate with each other, but talking about feelings and talking about what's on our mind was not necessarily what went around at the dinner table in the Ishikawa household. Yeah, it's a lot of it we tend to internalize and just keep it to ourselves. And it's not like we're taught to do that, but it's just like how my parents present themselves, and they don't necessarily outwardly express their own feelings or emotions or talk about it. So
Mhm.
as kids, we just sort of learn by watching them
Yeah,
and think, oh yeah, that's normal. That's how we're supposed to be.
that makes sense. Yeah, we do what our parents teach us, and so if they don't talk about it, then they're not opening like the pathway, I guess.
Mhm.
What is it like being over in Tokyo? Can you tell if there's a difference in being in a Japanese American household versus being in Japan?
I think that's part of the sort of eye-opening journey for me, that what I had been experiencing in my home in the States was very reflective of the situation here in Japan, where it still is to my understanding, a pretty taboo topic. We're not as far along in the process of really beginning to normalize it, as I feel like that process has sort of picked up more so in the States.
Totally.
And yeah, here, and it might be different from household to household, but in general, most people here are very kept to themselves. And it's almost like showing any sort of signs of emotion is considered weak or kind of puts pressure on the other person. And in Japanese culture,
Oh.
yeah, in Japanese culture, you are taught to sort of don't get in the way of other people, or other people around you are above you. And so,
Oh. Like prioritize their happiness
mhm,
above your own, kind of.
kind of, yeah. But that general idea is very much a part of this culture. And so putting your own emotions out there, or your thoughts and feelings out there, sort of becomes a burden, or there's this mindset that it sort of becomes a burden for the other person. And so, anything of that sort you stray away from.
That makes sense. That's really interesting because I do think, like you referred to in the States, we're doing somewhat of an okay job. We're at least making progress in destigmatizing it. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, it's okay to not be okay. We're going to talk about it. There's still plenty of things we don't talk about, or things we don't know how to talk about, or we can talk about it, but then how do we treat it and how does it actually go through the healthcare system? But that's interesting that maybe we are at least a little bit further in that progress.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I read a New York Times article recently about how there has been a recent spike in suicide among Japanese women, and that in last year, in 2020, it was almost 15% more than in 2019 for Japanese women. Does that, for me reading that, knowing nothing about it before, that surprised me. Does that surprise you?
Yes and no. So the first time I moved here back in 2013, I learned about train suicides, and it's seasonal. So there's a specific season, which I might be wrong, but it's around this time, when it's the start of, so in Japan, for your reference, the start of a new year, sort of a new season, is usually in this like April month. The new school year starts in April, the new fiscal year starts in April.
Oh,
So this is like a time of change, a time of new beginnings. And with that comes a general like population of happiness. So if you're not in that realm of happiness, then you become in this small percentage of people who are very unhappy. And it's
yeah.
almost like you compare yourself to those who are experiencing these new beginnings and new changes. And so that sort of has resulted in the season also being a season where there's a lot of suicides.
Wow.
And when, especially in Tokyo, when suicides happen, there are certain percentage of people who commit suicide by jumping in front of train tracks.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that was so normal, like an everyday occurrence,
Oh my
that
gosh.
I didn't know of like that sort of cultural, I guess, happenings.
Mm-hmm.
But when I heard about the background story from a local, and he was explaining to me that's why the trains are stopping. That's why there's this message that's going out. But I was like, but that's happening every day. Like,
Oh my
why
gosh.
why is why is this happening every day? And the person that I was talking to, he was telling me, oh, like I didn't realize until you pointed it out to me. In my mind, I was thinking, oh, it's just another accident. And he had become so used to the fact that these things were happening that he didn't question why they were happening.
Yeah.
And that sort of, so to your question about the increase in suicides during this COVID, especially for women, I think that with that base of knowing that it is a common occurrence in Japan and it just got escalated with the pandemic. At first, I was like, oh, I'm not super surprised with the numbers. But when I dig deeper into why and the sort of, there's probably many reasons, and each individual has their own reasons.
Yeah.
But when I begin to think about the why behind it, a lot of it really does have to do with this culture of not being able to share what's on
Yeah.
our minds and not being able to share this experience. And COVID, because you're stuck at home, you have closed off this outlet that maybe these women had prior to the pandemic to at least release some of
Yeah.
the things that were carried. But once that was cut off, and a lot of these females also lost their jobs in Japan, the pandemic has severely affected women in the workforce more than men. And so the stress of that, plus being at home now, being
Yeah.
the only caretaker for kids, family. And I was reading similar article, but it seems like the domestic violence rates have also
Oh.
increased.
Oh my gosh.
And so all of that combined has led to those numbers. And yeah, more of the reason why I think mental health, especially with this pandemic, has to become a bigger topic that people talk about here, because that in itself, even if that's the only thing that progresses out of this, I think it'll be a huge first step for this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just the fact of if you struggled with anxiety or depression or any mental illness or mental health issue before the pandemic, there was a lot of people, if you hadn't felt that yourself, you wouldn't know what that felt like. And then all of a sudden everyone's stuck at home. And I feel like everyone on some level has felt that, even if it's not
Mhm.
something that you needed to go be diagnosed for or be medicated for or whatever. People all kind of felt, oh, maybe this is what everybody that had depression, this is what they've been feeling this whole time. Oh my gosh,
Mhm.
on a smaller level. So at least there's
Mhm.
more of a like mutual understanding, I guess. I hope at
Mhm.
least. You talked about how people in Japan or Japanese Americans, from your experience, it is not talked about. What about going out and seeking help? Like instead of talking to a family member or a friend, like have you thought about going in, or has it been normalized to go out and seek help to see a therapist or a doctor? Where does that stand for people?
I can't speak for everyone here,
Right.
but actually, so my company, we are a US brand, but I was actually surprised that it's not specifically a mental health specialist, but we
Mhm.
have a sort of support system where our human resources team reaches out to us every 3 months and asks if we need some type of health support
Hmm.
or counselor that we want to talk to, then that resource is available.
Mhm.
And so I was actually pretty surprised because I didn't think that that was something that was normal here.
Mhm.
I don't know how much the resource has been used. I used it once, and for me it wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I've actually been looking for bilingual therapists in Japan, but I mean, 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I don't think I would have actually been proactive to seek out help.
Mm. Mhm.
But from my friends beginning to normalize it around me to just the situation that we're all in right now, I think has led me to realize that there comes a point where I just cannot be stuck in my head.
Yeah.
Like, it's just chaos in my head right now.
Oh no. I
And
don't
I
mean to
think
laugh at that, but I have definitely felt that as well. Sometimes like, yeah, there's just a lot going on in my head and it has to get out somehow.
yeah, and I think I remember I was listening to one of your episodes and you were talking about how this pandemic has sort of forced us to be in our heads a lot more. And
Mhm.
when I was listening to it, I was like, yeah, like in normal circumstances, I could be stuck in my head for a bit, but then I would have some sort of distraction, like going out to eat with friends or doing this outside somewhere or having this going that way and that way. But yeah, like the amount of time I've been spending here is just,
Yeah.
and there are good things that have come out of it. And then there are times where I feel like I am in a black hole and cannot get out.
Mhm.
But I think without this time being spent in my head, I wouldn't have realized that as well, like how deep I can go or how stuck I can be. And so yeah, like I have been seeking out help, which is a huge step for me. And
Yeah.
I don't think, it's interesting. Like I don't think I've I've talked to my parents about this, which also is quite new. But they've actually been a lot more normal about it. No overreactions, no sort of typical reactions that I was expecting.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I think my parents also have, in a way, become a lot more accustomed to these ideas and these concepts because they've lived in the States for so long and have been exposed to it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
the exposure is so important. It's like without knowing, you don't really even think about it. It does just not cross your mind. But once you are exposed to it, it it becomes something you see so often or you hear so often, and then it becomes normal to you. I'm
Totally.
I hope that that spreads more here in Japan too.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, like because with my family, we didn't talk a lot about mental health. We definitely didn't use those words when I was growing up. I feel like if I was really sad, I would talk to my parents sometimes, or sometimes I'd just cry in my room and like write in my journal. But until you do talk about it, you don't know that you're not talking about it, even kind
Hmm.
of. It's like, oh, we weren't talking about this. We were all just in our own heads the whole time. Okay, I guess now we do this. So that
Hmm.
that makes total sense. I've seen you post on social media about what you were talking about a little bit ago, being in grad school and your friends started talking about their own mental health journeys and you started sharing yours. What does that mean to you?
For me, I think it sort of deepened my relationship with people in a good way, obviously. But until I realized how much opening up to me feels like I've stepped like right into someone's home. And like up until then, it's like talking at the front door.
Oh.
But yeah, the journey of having my friends, especially in grad school, being so vulnerable and being so open about what's on their minds, what's going through their heads, and opening that door to me and to those around me, it really put that relationship in another level in my mind. And so I really found the benefit of doing that and having those, it really became like a human connection that I didn't know was missing, or it wasn't
Mm.
necessarily, maybe it wasn't missing, but it was something that I had never experienced until then. And so it has helped me to realize that for me, that's something that I really appreciate and that I want to like open the door to invite anyone to do, because it's just, I think it makes you realize that no matter who you are or what your background is, what your experience is, we all are experiencing some type of challenges or some type of struggle that we just can't handle by ourselves.
Mhm.
And it does bring us all down to this human level of, regardless of anything, we are at our core human.
Yeah. I love that metaphor of I've never thought about it in that way of like being outside someone's front door versus actually going into their house, like being in their living room, welcoming them into your brain or your
Mhm.
house. What would you say to anybody listening who hasn't gotten there yet, who is still nervous about opening up with their friends or family or whoever it is about their mental health?
No, I think it's baby steps. I, for one, I'm still in the process. I've been able to open up on certain things, but I'm still struggling to find my voice in others. And I think everyone will have different ways of figuring out what works for them and what's comfortable for them. But yeah, I think that you almost have to first trust yourself as
Mm,
much as you trust the other person,
yeah.
and let yourself know that it's okay to be honest with what you're feeling and to allow those feelings to be feelings that you experience. And it's nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to question, and allow yourself to be, I guess, allow yourself to be.
Yeah. And feel and have the feelings and just
Hmm.
let them be there. That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
Are there any things you've started or you've always done that you do in your routine to try to like self-care habits that if you're having a bad day and you're already having those feelings to try to get yourself feeling better or just things you do to keep your brain there in general in a better spot?
Yeah. So you mentioned journaling. I think I started journaling back in 2012 or
Whoa.
somewhere around that year. Because I think at that time, I mean, I didn't realize it, but at that time, I think I was over capacity in my brain. So I had to get some of that out of
Uh-huh.
here. And so my method was to journal, and if I read back to my journal, it's like mostly negative thoughts, negative feelings, but I kept up with it and recorded all of my emotions, my feelings in that form, and that helped me to let some of that space out of my brain. So I've continued to do that. And then the other thing is, about 2 years ago I started meditating.
Ooh,
In
uh-huh.
grad school we had a professor that did meditation during class.
Yes. I wish every school everywhere that there was a teacher that would do that because that would
Yeah.
be wonderful.
Yeah, and before I had started, I thought I was not the type of person who would be able to do it.
Me too.
And it took me a while to actually figure out the best way for me to use that tool. But I have found a lot of benefits from, really, for me, it helps me to organize whatever is in my head. It might not clear it, but it at least allows me to think through and place everything in compartments so that when I am done with the session, then I feel a lot better than 10 minutes ago before I
Mhm.
had started. So, those two things I feel like for me have been great self care tools that I can do on my own.
Yeah. Do you do guided meditations or do you just go through it yourself or what's been the most helpful for you?
I do guided ones. I find it easier for me to have someone walk me through it.
Yep, same for me. If I can listen to somebody else, then it kind of stops, at least helps stop the thoughts in my own brain for a second or just
Mhm.
like put them on pause. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's so many free apps, so many useful guided videos and resources out there. I actually, because I thought it was worth it, I've subscribed to a meditation app that has a lot, it just has a lot more options, but the free ones are just as good and just as useful.
This is the part of the podcast where normally you would hear an ad, and maybe sometimes you skip ahead, which, just for the record, is kind of rude, but whatever. Don't do that this time, because this episode, instead of a commercial, I want to share a way to help our friends in the Asian American Pacific Islander communities. The reality is, there are a ton of ways to help, and a ton of organizations to donate to. So, where do you start? I just found out about a pretty useful site. It's a special GoFundMe page that's all about stopping Asian hate. There's an AAPI community fund that will benefit a growing list of organizations, including Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta and Filipino Advocates for Justice. The page also features the verified GoFundMe fundraisers for the victims and survivors of the horrific shootings that happened in Georgia on March 16th. Of course, money can never bring back the human lives that were lost, but it can help support their loved ones as they deal with the trauma and the heartbreak. The site to find all of these fundraisers is gofundme.com/AAPI. Again, that's gofundme.com/AAPI. And of course, we put the link in our show notes. Now, can we switch gears a little bit? Unfortunately, we have to talk about, I think everyone's aware at this point, anyone listening, of all of the horrible things that have been happening to Asian Americans here in America that really kind of came to a head in Georgia a couple of weeks ago. And I think for a lot of us Americans, white Americans, personally, until things are in our face and so impossible to ignore, I guess it's kind of similar with mental health things, right? Like until you in your own brain, me, until it's so impossible to ignore and I can't function as a human, I might not deal with my mental health. Same with these big issues like racism in our country. Until they're so obvious in our face because 6 Asian women have been murdered, now we're like, oh, this is what the AAPI community has been talking about for way too long. Is that how it's felt to you, that this has been happening and continues to happening and something really horrible was inevitable, I guess?
I think especially with the pandemic, the increase in violence and increase in hate crimes have been ongoing for over a year, but it has been escalating. And I think the attack that happened in Georgia was sort of the tipping point, and it still continues. It's still continuing.
Yeah.
And, I think it's definitely been something that the Asian community, the Asian American community has been trying to vocalize. But I can speak for myself, but for me, this past year has been an awakening for myself as well. And realizing that these issues have been building up even prior to the pandemic has been around all the years I've spent growing up living in the States. But for me, it didn't seem like it was a huge problem if it was only affecting myself, or, if it was something that was like what we are hearing now, like microaggressions. They're not physically damaging, but the more and more those pile up on top of each other, things like what happened in Atlanta, things that are happening to our elders, are the outcome of all of that. And so for me as well, I think it's been a huge, unfortunate way, but a huge learning to all of the things that were happening as an Asian American woman growing up, even in California, a place that most people think is very diverse and very liberal, but even in California, there are these microaggressions towards Asian Americans and people of color in general that are, if they combine and pile up on top of one another, become something that can cost a life or cost
Yeah.
many lives.
How have you been managing and getting through this time?
I think for me, it's been really difficult, especially living so far away from home and being in a different country from my friends and family. Last week, especially, I definitely, my headspace was not in a great place. And all of these attacks seem to be very random and it's been happening all over the country. And so, I worry for my parents who are turning 60. So they're not young necessarily, they're not old, but they speak in Japanese when they're together. And so when you pass by them, for example, it's hard to tell that, they've been living in the States for over 30 years. So I fear for them being targeted at with one of these racially triggered attacks.
Yeah.
My brother lives alone, and I mean he's still young, but we all look, obviously we're all Asian. We look a certain way. And for me, my first and last name obviously is Japanese, and my brother's as well. And so, like, even though we were born and raised in the States, most people don't automatically think like, oh, like this person's American. Where usually most people will, from my experience, will assume I'm from Japan and moved to the States when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
So even just that, I feel like for me, I brushed it off because I feel like people are not ill-intentioned. Like for the most part, people don't ask these questions on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's just lack of knowledge. Like, I mean, if I had just met someone, especially for me, like I have experience living in Japan. So my first instinct was it's okay because I can explain myself.
Like if someone's asking you like, "Oh, where are you from?"
Hmm.
Yeah.
But the more I think about that question or the more I think about that situation and the cultural outcomes or cultural effects that it may have
Mm-hmm.
towards our population as a whole, the more I am reconsidering the way that I've internalized it to be, oh, maybe that's not the way I should be approaching that idea or that concept of that being okay.
Yeah, I read an article the other day. The Asian man who wrote it was saying, like, just don't ask that question. Like, even if you don't have an ill intention behind it, just the fact that you're asking it, maybe it doesn't matter. Like you said, people walking by your parents, hearing them speak Japanese, they might not know that they've lived here for 30 years, but it also shouldn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, whether they've lived here for 30 years or they're on vacation here for a week, like they're still just humans that
Mm-hmm.
you should be nice to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, with what you're saying about your response to that question, would you agree with that? Like, just from your perspective, just avoid it. And that's how to
Yeah.
be courteous, is to just not ask.
Yeah. I think given all of what has happened, it's just like you said, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I think it does boil down to we are all humans, and if we can get to a place where we're all treating each other as human beings and not trying to separate ourselves with all of these different parts of us that make us, I mean, obviously they make us who we are, but that shouldn't be something that divides us or causes us to attack one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think for my family, the tipping point was when my dad had warned my brother to not step outside if he doesn't need to, which in my household, I would be the one that would always be told, like, hey, like, don't go to XY neighborhood alone, or don't be out past a certain time. And
Just because you're the girl.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so that was normal for me, but to hear that statement come from my dad to
Yeah.
my brother was just like a whole, it put everything into a different perspective of like, oh wow, like we're actually having to have to worry about our lives
Yeah.
in like broad daylight too. That sort of comment from my dad was for us just like, okay, like we can't not live our lives, but at the same time, like we have to make sure that we are looking out for
Yeah.
one another. Yeah, just that the fact that we have to do that is just something that I don't want to have to continue for the rest of my life or the
Yeah.
rest of if I were to have kids in the future. I want to make sure that we at least progress now so that
Yeah.
that doesn't have to happen for anyone in the future.
Do you remember growing up? Like, were you really young when you started to understand racism and see these things happening? Do you remember?
Um, I didn't put them into context, but I remember my first clear memory is I remember trying to fix whatever accent I had. So
Oh,
I grew up, I think my first language was Japanese just because my parents spoke Japanese at
oh wow.
home. And
Hmm.
then right about whenever I entered preschool was when I learned English. But because I spent more time speaking Japanese at that time, I must have had some type of Japanese accent
Hmm.
to my English. And I think in first grade or so, I caught myself realizing I spoke differently than
Oh.
my friends at school. And
Hmm.
so I remember listening to like this, it wasn't even a CD, I think it was like a cassette tape. But I remember listening to this recording of someone speaking and mimicking the sounds that was coming out and figuring out like how to speak or how to say certain words without an accent, and that memory is very clear in my mind, and so it must have been some type of like awakening at that moment
Yeah.
that I was different, but I needed to, in order to fit in, I needed to fix that. Um, and there are certain things like looking back, I totally feel bad, especially towards my parents. But I remember I didn't like speaking Japanese in front of my classmates or my friends. So whenever I had to speak to my mom or my dad, I would run up to them and like whisper and then
Oh.
run back to my friends and like, but I didn't feel comfortable speaking in English to my parents. And so that was like a dilemma I had in
Yeah.
within myself. Whereas I know a lot of at least Japanese Americans who are similar, like first generation or second generation, would eventually stop speaking Japanese because they just didn't want to have to deal with the bullying or sort of the eyes that came with speaking another language.
Hmm.
So I'm glad that I could maintain both languages, but looking back, I feel really bad about being sort of almost embarrassed to speak the language of my parents and
Hmm.
my motherland.
Yeah. I was watching some panel interview thing earlier today, and they talked about how a lot of times one of the big issues is the bystander. Like if you're out at a restaurant, for example, and you see someone yelling something racist at somebody, people just sit there and eat their spaghetti or whatever they're eating and don't go in and say something. Is that
Hmm.
something that you've watched happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if there were bystanders, I think I would have caught on at a younger age that this wasn't normal or this wasn't okay, because I think like any Asian American family would have experienced some type of, I guess, verbal violence or some
Yeah.
type of comment that was not okay, but usually it just gets brushed off. We brush it off because of fear of, if we say something, it might trigger violence, it might cause
Hmm.
disturbance, which goes against our culture. Like, don't disturb, don't
Yeah.
um, don't cause any ruckus. But like, I really do think, and it's hard. I don't know how I would react in the moment if something like that would happen around me, and if I would be able to say something.
Hmm.
But I really think, and like I've signed up for bystander training, but it does mean so much to have someone stand up for you in whatever situation,
Yeah.
whether that's with racism, sexism, any isms. It leaves an impression to everyone around as well, that like, oh, okay, this is not acceptable, this is not good,
Yeah.
this is something that we need to stand up for as well.
It's like you're not alone. Like, oh,
Hmm.
someone's actually going to care enough about me as a human to say that this is wrong.
Hmm.
Yeah. What are some of the things from your perspective that us allies to the AAPI community can do to help, to support you?
I'll speak for what has really helped me. I mean, I was stuck in my head all of these past, especially this month has been really, really heavy. And it seemed like no matter how vocal I was trying to be, that no one was picking up my small rally cry. I was like, someone, someone hear me out.
Oh, yeah.
But all of the people who reached out to me, I think that in itself was like so helpful, to just have someone to share what all of what is happening has meant for me. And I think the biggest thing is, like, I don't expect myself to be changing 100 people or 200 or whatever, like a ton of people's perspectives, or reach out to that many people. But if I could even have my closest friends or my small community see what living in the US is like for an Asian person or anyone from the BIPOC community, I think that in itself is a huge step forward. And if one person can affect one person, there's so much more value, I feel like, with that one relationship than reaching a mass with a smaller impact. So I think reaching out to a friend or someone from the API community that might be going through a similar situation where they're just stuck in their heads and they're feeling just so down and sort of hopeless, to reach out to them and just be like, just a shoulder to lean on.
Hmm.
And that's just, for me, that was the biggest motivation or encouragement. And really, it helped me to look at things in a more positive light, that we can progress and we can move forward.
Yeah. What do you wish people knew about what it's like to be an Asian American?
Hmm. Well, I can talk about, wow, my struggles of not feeling 100% American, because I felt like people didn't see me as American, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that has just been ingrained in my brain that has caused me to think that no matter how many years I live in the States, how much I can speak English without an accent, or I don't know what else, like how I played sports that were typically not played by Asians. I felt as if I was a forever foreigner, which in my case, I think that feeling was also triggered from the fact that my home was very much so a Japanese household in America.
Mm.
But then again, like that doesn't have to be how I think and how I feel. Even if my household and my home maintained Japanese culture and Japanese language, that doesn't lessen the fact that I'm American. It doesn't take away from anything regarding my Americanness or my right to be to be an Asian American. And so I think just knowing that like we were talking about earlier, the microaggressions, the simple questions that might not seem harmful, the Asian jokes that we all learn as a kid, all of those things at the moment may not seem to affect each individual at that time, but in a whole, it does lead to people's way of thinking and a cultural way of thinking of Asians being a forever foreigner. And so, yeah, just being mindful of the things that you say and reevaluating the thoughts that you have for myself as well. And I think the Asian community, the API community, we all have certain parts that we're all contributing to that build up this type of mindset and culture. And so I have to work towards unlearning and relearning what would move us forward. And I think if we can all do that together, then, gradually we'll have a different perspective and a different mindset that will include Asians as part of who we define as Americans, which also sounds very strange, but yeah.
Right. It does, to have to say it like that, like, oh, we'll include that, but we should already be there. We just heard Satomi talk about how important the role of a bystander is when something bad is happening to another human. It's another one of those things that no one really teaches us growing up, but there should totally be a class for it. And as Satomi mentioned, there actually are classes on this. And there are even free options happening right now. I just signed up for one from an organization called Holla Back, a group dedicated to ending harassment in all its forms. They are partnering with Asian Americans Advancing Justice to offer free bystander intervention courses over Zoom to stop anti-Asian American and xenophobic harassment. It says it's a 1-hour interactive training that will teach you Holla Back's 5 Ds of bystander intervention methodology: distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. I'm personally really excited this exists, and also wishing I had done it sooner. But like I said at the beginning of this episode, all we can do is keep learning and then do better once we become aware of something important. You can register for the bystander intervention training at hollaback.org/bystander intervention. Again, that's hollaback.org/bystander intervention, or click the link in our show notes. Ooh, a quick round of questions, like a speed round.
Okay.
Okay. When was the last time you cried?
2 days ago, when I spoke to my colleague about the things happening, and it still triggered emotions. I think the more I speak about it and the more I let out, the less emotional trigger happens. Still, the emotions are still there, but it doesn't let out the waters.
What about the last time you had a big belly laugh?
Belly laugh. Probably. I mean, it must have been long ago because I have to think about it.
Oh no! What are you grateful for right now?
Oh, a lot of things. Obviously, I'm grateful to be living through a pandemic with a secure and stable job, and friends and family are safe and healthy. I feel like that's all I can wish for right now.
Yeah. What sound can calm you down and bring you joy?
Ooh, so my friends think I'm super cheesy, but my alarm clock is the sound of the ocean.
Oh.
And the sound of the wind and the sound of birds chirping. And so I think
that sounds lovely.
Anything in nature really helps me calm down, and there's a sort of peacefulness and serenity that comes with, even since I can't physically be there right now, just the sound of it does wonders.
Yeah. What is the best thing you do for your mental health?
Sleep.
Ooh, are you good at getting enough sleep?
Not, but I know that it's the best thing because when I get a really good quality sleep, no alarms, and I can fall asleep immediately, those are the days when I feel the most refreshed in the morning.
Yeah. What about the worst thing you do for your mental health that maybe you need to stop doing?
My phone.
Oh.
I mean, for better or worse, it's the source of all my information, but it's also just the endless scrolling and the surplus of information you get from it. It becomes overwhelming, and yet I can tell I am addicted to my phone. So
yeah, me too. What is your favorite thing about your brain?
My brain, I guess the flexibility. It's definitely something I'm still working on, and it's something that for me is a trained skill, I guess. But once I realized that something in my head is in a solid state, I've learned to sort of melt it down and break it apart and reevaluate or rethink about what that really means, which I think meditation has really helped me to unravel everything that's in here and break it all down. So the flexibility is something that I have developed and have grown to really appreciate.
What is something you're really good at that people might not know?
This is totally random, but I can hula hoop for hours on end.
Yes.
Once I start, unless someone tells me to stop, I don't have to stop.
That's awesome. And the last one is very random. If you had to get something tattooed on your forehead, like everyone's just doing it now, it's a stupid thing in the future, and it's like your billboard to yourself / the world, what would your forehead tattoo say?
Oh, my forehead. Okay. What would I tattoo?
I promise to never actually force you to do this.
I'll just say the first word that came up in my brain.
Yeah.
It's Japanese, but the English translation of it is connect, but it's not like, connecting two pieces. I mean, it can mean that too. But there's this word called tsunagu, and in Japanese so we have 3 alphabets, but one of the alphabet uses Chinese characters, and the meaning of connect in this context is sort of like it's a deeper level of connection, like connecting heart to heart, people to people. And I think through all of everything that we've talked about today too, and just all the things happening in the world, if we all connected at that level of heart to heart, I think the world would be at a better place.
Absolutely. Now I think you should get that tattoo on your forehead. What was the word? How do you say it in Japanese?
Tsunagu. You would, if you spell it out, it would be like TSUNAGU.
Oh, cool. Wow, that's beautiful. And is there anything else about mental health or being an Asian American or anything that you wish people would know?
One last thought, the process of talking and just speaking about what is on our minds, my mind, and conversing with someone and sort of understanding where the other person or whoever I'm talking to is at, and hearing their perspective and listening to how their perspective may have come from.
Mm-hmm.
That learning experience or that experience in itself, I think has been the best thing I've done in this past year in different scenarios and different topics. But I don't think I've really thought about the value of conversations or just the value of speaking until this past year, especially in a pandemic. And so if there's like anything that whoever is listening could try, I think that is the best first step I took and has led to so much self understanding and self awakening as much as it has sort of progressed any conversations around whatever topic forward. So
yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. And then of course, where can everybody follow you? On Instagram?
Satomi.Alyssa, SATOMI.ALISSA.
Well, thank you so much. This is so wonderful. Thank you for talking to me and opening up about these things that are obviously not light topics and not easy to talk about. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and wisdom.
Thank you for allowing me to dive into a space that I am definitely new in, but am very grateful to have found myself in.
And thank you, wonderful human listening right now, for listening to this episode of Mentally Together. We put out new episodes every Monday, so I, Cassidy Quinn, will see you next week. In the meantime, go do something nice for your brain today. Try meditating, donate to a good cause, reach out to a friend and see how they're doing. Whatever will make your day just a little bit better. Because remember, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. Mentally Together is produced, hosted, and edited by Cassidy Quinn in collaboration with Koba FM, a podcast network that is all about community, baby.